I started last week with my DFS. Let's start with your DFS this week. You're the defending champion of the week. So
I
let's hear
like
what you
that.
got.
I like that. Chains get to go first on their
Yep.
lineups the week after. DFS picks. Well, the guy I like the most this week, really, when you're looking at those top tier players that I thought had the most value, as you kind of already mentioned. I mean, you can go with guys like Scotty at what was it, 14,200. You can go with Cantley at 10,400. Oberge at 10,300. But I really liked Sam Burns at 9,600. I think that this really is a guy that I think can win this tournament. And he tied for 29th here last year. He's, strokes game total, was 11th on tour last year. His putting is elite. There's really nobody better than Sam Burns last year. It really covers his weaknesses in his game. He's extremely weak at tee to green on, I don't want to say he's extremely weak. He's inconsistent. Weeks when he is doing well in that category, he's normally, coming top 5 in the tournament. Weeks where he struggles, he's able to kind of keep himself afloat with his flat stick. But he was actually first in strokes gained putting in 2025. So really like that, especially with some of these courses where like you're getting a different look at greens because of, the course change up every day. I think somebody who, has their flat sticks hot is going to really perform. And Sam Burns is somebody who can kind of light it up in that categories. He was my first pick at 9,600. I went directly to my guy. My golf guy is my second pick, Ricky Fowler, 8,400. I was kind of after Sam Burns. I was like, okay, I want to get into, a mid to low 8,000s category. I like to balance my lineup out here a little bit and pick a guy who I feel like isn't going to be owned high. I don't think we're going to see 30% ownership in Ricky Fowler this week. I think he's going to be under 15, honestly. I could be wrong, but and he's a guy, again, that, as I mentioned, why he was my golf guy, off the tee last year, strokes gained, he was 37th, and tee to green 66th, and he's pretty good around the greens. If his putter's going, I think he's going to be in a good spot this year to at least make the cut and get you some points throughout the weekend in your DFS lineups. Another guy I really like here on at 8,100 is Jason Day. There's a lot of guys who think he's old and washed up, I'll call it. He's anything from that. He's capable of some really, high bursts and some, and putting together extremely good weeks here. He wasn't good off the tee in 2025, but around the greens and putting is what has kept him competitive in tournaments. He came tied for third here last year. I really like that, obviously. He knows the course. He knows the layout. He's comfortable playing different courses every day. And just on the experience side, I like Jason Day at 8,100. My next pick here was Justin Rose at 7,900. He didn't play in this tournament last year. Really struggled last year at the start of the season, but really finished strong last year. His putting and approach is really in the top 60 on the tour. And he's somebody who, again, I think he hits fairways, and some of these fairways are bigger, except for the Pete Dye course. So I think even if he's a little inconsistent off the tee, I think that he's going to keep the ball in play and be able to kind of put some birdies together. At 7,800, so as you can kind of see here, I really have a balanced lineup. Picking Sam Burns at 9,600 allows me to really pick a few guys in the 8,000s, a few guys in the high 7,000s. I never really had to dabble with anybody in that 6,000 range. I always find you're kind of taking really, you're throwing a blind dart at the board in that range, hoping that somebody hits. So this has really allowed me building up my lineup with Sam Burns first and not going for one of those really expensive guys to really balance everything out. And so Akshay was my next guy at 7,800. Again, didn't play in this event last year. A lot of top 30 finishes last year, and he was actually ranked in strokes gained approach. He was 13th last year, top 30 in putting. Struggles a bit around off the tee and around the greens, but a strong iron play should help put him in position to make a lot of birdies this week. So if his putter's going, I think he's really gonna have a chance to score. And rounding up my lineup at 7,600 was again a guy we spoke about already, Wyndham Clark. Again, no reason. A lot of people have no reason to like him this week. I think he's going to be low owned, especially if you didn't put your homework in. At 7,600, I think there's a few guys in that area that some other people might go with. So I really like that aspect, where the low ownership aspect or potential. He was cut here last week, shooting -5 when -9 was the cut. And again, one of the few players that kind of really seem to be trying to ramp up to start the year here, playing a few unofficial events in December. His tee to greens normally above average, and strokes gained around the green is pretty elite at in the top 25. and putting 60th. So I think he's got a good shot this week. Any concerns with my lineup there, Ryan? Anything you want to say about that?
I'll say this: Rose and Clark definitely, really not on my radar, but I understand why you pick them. And I can get behind those picks. But you know what? And I just want to talk about your balanced lineup, right? Solid, like your lowest pick is 7,600, right? And you mentioned by going Burns, I think fifth or sixth, ranked on the DraftKings, then immediately going to Fowler at 84 allows you to have that balanced lineup. What's your opinion on taking Scotty Scheffler at 14-2? And then what kind of lineup are you looking at if you were to try to do something like that? Because you mentioned some of the shot in the dark 6,000 picks. Well, if you have Scotty, that's kind of a thing.
Well, yeah, that's it, right? I mean, you take Scotty at 14-2, you're already handicapping yourself and your bankroll for the rest of your lineup, right? I mean, Scotty, now you're putting all your eggs in Scotty. He's got to win, and then you also have to take some extreme shot in the darks at guys like Bud Cauley at 6,700, Tony Finau, who played terrible last week at 6,600, Tom Kim, who had a poor showing last year, pretty much all year. I don't think he really performed well at 6,600. You're probably even going to have to go with some guys even lower in the sixes too, especially if you reach for a guy in like the mid sevens to try to get somebody else who you feel kind of confident in. Some of these got Patton Kizzire, at 6,400. I don't know if I'm saying any names that are making you feel good right now, Ryan, but I don't think I am. So like, that's it. That's just it, right? You take Scotty at the top. Yeah, sure. I feel great about Scotty, but like in order to compete and to have a lineup that I feel like can really win, like all these shot in the darks that you took are going to have to hit. And they're not just going to hit. If you take Scotty and he wins and you have a bunch of guys who just make the cut and finish, in the 60th, you're still not, yes, you might make some money, but you're not having a lineup that's in contention to win it all, right? And so that's my fear taking Scotty so high at such a high price range.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with this. And honestly, I think DraftKings does it just to toy with people because everybody's going to want to take him knowing like, okay, he's probably going to win, right? And let's say he does. And I think DraftKings does this intentionally to say, okay, let's say 30% of the people own Scotty. That might be 30% of the field that maybe we don't even have to compete against realistically, unless you get really lucky with some of these low end picks like you mentioned. I'm hoping Scotty is in the 25 to 30%.
I hope he's 50% owned. I really do. and the flip side here is if he's 50% owned, and let's just say Scotty has a mediocre showing and he comes tied for 30th, and let's just say it's the first term of the year. Who knows? Like, obviously he's going to be ready to go and he's the best player in the world right now, but your lineup's gone. Like, unless you have again, those guys in the 6,000s that are 2% owned and one of them ends up hitting as a blind dart throw here at the board and they end up winning, that's really your only shot, right? So I like my lineup being a little bit more balanced, giving me guys who I feel like all, they all can kind of compete and a few guys there that have potential to win. And I think it gives me a lot better success because, I mean, we're all playing to win. We want to win the DraftKings tournament. We want to win the highest purse. We want to, some of us want, again, and everyone gamble responsibly, of course. Some of us are okay with the $10 wins and some of us are playing to try to win the whole thing and whatever that prize is, right? And so I think setting my lineup and having a balanced approach like that is the way that I typically like to attack these.
Yeah. And you know what? I'll say this, as I go through my lineup, I didn't have a very dissimilar strategy from you. I typically will try to find that player in the sixes, a player. So for that reason, I'm off Scotty as well because I'd have to find 2 or 3 of those guys. Last week I hit Stevenson at 67. This week I looked at the 6,000s and you dropped some names there and I wasn't thrilled about any of those guys either. So I also decided to go with maybe a little bit more balanced lineup, right? So and you see a couple common names here. Start with Sam Burns. You mentioned putting, solid. Top one, I think it was number 1, if not number 2, 3 on the tour last year. Love his game for this type of setup, especially on the Pete Dye course. So he's my guy this week. He's going to be the guy I'm going to spend the most money on. Really like him. And, someone we talked about the Sony Open was Siwoo Kim. He's coming in number 2 for me at 9,000. The reason why I like Siwoo, I fell in love with this guy last week, starting +4 and still coming in, I think tied for 11th. This is the type of course or setup where, you could have a stretch of bad holes because you're not familiar necessarily with that course that day, or one of those 3 courses isn't quite your setup. But I want a guy, if he goes for 3 bogeys out of 5 holes, that he says, who cares? Let's get the next one. And that mentality, that doesn't show up on the stats. And you know I'm a stats guy, right? So like I'm now going against some of my own theories here. But on top of that, though, he had a pretty good performance here in the past couple of years. I saw him here, made the cut each of the last 3 years, and had a 25 and 22 position performance in 2024, 2025, 2023 actually. And his stats do well for this course. Or these courses. You know what? I'm high on Siwoo
I
coming
like
in at
I
9,000.
I like Siwoo. I think you make a lot of good points, and something that a lot of people probably disregard this week is like that mental toughness
Yeah.
component, because you are playing such a variety of different courses that you're bound to have some bad stretches. And guys, like we saw last week with Siwoo, you had a bad stretch. You just put in his rearview mirror and came back and shot minus 15 the rest of the tournament, right? I mean, like, you need guys like that have that mental toughness. And as you mentioned, there's no stat for that. We can just kind of see from previous performances. So makes sense why you'd take him after last week.
Yeah, that's it. And I wasn't necessarily trying to get into the 9,000, my second guy, just like you went 8,500, 8,400. But I couldn't leave him off my team this week, in that range. You look at that group of guys from the mid, 8,000s to the mid 9,000s, even then that's kind of high, especially taking Burns at close to 10. I couldn't leave him off my team. I figured, let's take him. And then that falls into, my next pick at 81 was Jason Day. I have him as well. I'm just gonna agree with all your points. Being a old guy myself, I love his game. I think he can really handle the pressure. Not worried about Jason Day. Also performed very well here. I think you mentioned some of his stats in the past.
Yeah, T3 here last week or last year.
That's right. T3 last year's. He knows how to play this course. So I'm definitely high on him. Next guy, JT Pustin. He's my golf guy. I'm putting him in there, coming in at 8,000. Like I mentioned, tied for 12, tied for 11, tied for 6 each of the last 3 years. Has the game for this type of setup. So I think he's going to do it again. Someone I talked about in some of our dark horses is my next pick, Hoot. Christian Buzenhout, 77. Great performances here. He had tied for second in 24, tied for 11th in 23. Missed the cut last year. But when I get down to the 77, there's, I guess, going to be some risks to take when you start to get lower down the list. I'm not worried about this risk. He knows how to play these courses in this event. He does it every year. So I really liked him, liked his game. And that actually left me with 7,400. And you talked last week about not spending all your money just to get there. But for me, I had 7,400, and I found a guy at 7,400 that I really liked, Aaron Smalley. He went tied for 11th, tied for 22nd, tied for 22 each of the last 3 tournaments at this course. Really liked it. His game is, I have him ranked actually in the top 20 for his game stats on against the field. For some of those things we're talking about, strokes gained on around the green and putting, the tee to green, the accuracy, stuff like that. So I think, and he actually had a great performance, especially round 1 last week. He was up near the top of the leaderboard. He fell off a little bit, but he's also coming off a decent performance at the Sony. So I think his confidence is up, and I like owning him at 74. So that's my lineup. Those are the guys that I took. I try to balance it out. Maybe not quite as well balanced as you. You didn't have to go quite as low as I did, but definitely, I think I put together a pretty solid lineup. I think everybody's making the cut on this one. I don't see. I'm trying to go 6 for 6 on this one.
Hey, that's what we're striving for here for sure. I like it. I like your lineup. I think it's still well balanced, even though you got to 0 in the salary. I think your reasoning, Smalley. I know you mentioned him last week too. You're somebody that was on your radar as a potential pick, and some of these other guys, Bezudenhout. They're definitely kind of see why you kind of maybe you took some not. I'm not going to say gambles, some strategic, statistically backed decisions on some of these guys that again, I think too, and again, I'm a huge advocate of trying to find guys that have potentially good games set up for the weeks that are likely going to have low ownership, because again, I think that's how you're going to win some of these, right? So, and I think these guys too probably check that bill as well. So no, great lineup.